Being a busy homeschool mother of 4, taking care of my household of 6, often you can find me in my kitchen working by candlelight, preparing food for the following day, and tonight is one of those nights. In this video, I'm taking you along with me as I prepare some food the night before, and also the following day I'll be sharing more food preparations and recipes that I love to make for my family. In this video, I'm going to be sharing a breakfast idea, sourdough ideas and tips, and how I make bone broth and what I like to use my bone broth for. In this video, I'll also be sharing a Costco delivery that we received on the day that I was filming this, and I'll be sharing some pantry staples and things that our family loves to get at Costco. So to begin with, tonight I am setting some bone broth in my pressure cooker or Instapot. Earlier today at the local market, I picked up an organic whole chicken, and with bone broth, you do want to make sure that the meat and bones that you use in your broth are organic and best quality, because you are deriving all of those nutrients out of the bones. You do want to make sure that it is organic. I try to make bone broth every week, and it's really easy to do with the pressure cooker. You just place everything in there and set it for 20 hours, and it really does all the work for you. All I do is I put in filtered water, I put a whole chicken, sometimes I'll put in beef bones that I had left over from something else that I was making, and then I just add in some bay leaves, rosemary, sometimes sage and oregano, an onion, and I just set it for 20 hours and forget about it until the next day. As I mentioned in my previous video, when I noticed that we're running low on sourdough bread, both in the freezer and raw loaves in the fridge, I have my starter fed, and I never have it planned exactly what I want to make. I always like to do something different, whether it's just plain bread or a sourdough cheesy bread, maybe a jalapeno cheddar bread, or dinner rolls. But my point is that I'll feed my sourdough starter, and then I'll decide what I want to make in the evening. Tonight, I decided that I would like to make a sourdough cheesy bread with some herbs, and so that's what I'm working on right now. Here I made a double portion of sourdough, and I'll be using 1/2 for my cheesy herb bread, and the other half I will be using for bagels for breakfast the following morning. It is now the next morning, and I am currently working on some sourdough bagels. I love my bagel recipe, and it's so easy to use, and I do have it up on my blog over at kibcofamilyhomestead.com, so be sure to check it out because it's one of my staple breakfasts that I love to make every single week, at least once or twice a week, just because it is so easy to make and so convenient. So last night when I made my dough of sourdough, all I did was I mixed my ingredients, which is simply active starter, flour, filtered water, and salt. I just mixed it all really well, covered it with a plate, and I set it aside on the counter for a full night. I did not stretch and fold, I didn't do anything special. All I did was mix my dough and set it aside overnight. If you are new to sourdough, I just wanted to encourage you and tell you, do not be intimidated by it. Don't be afraid to give it a try. When I first started, I was super intimidated by it and I did not think that I could get it. There's just the whole process of feeding the starter and the hours that you have to count and making sure your starter is bubbly and then mixing the dough and doing the stretch and folds every 30 minutes. But at this point, it's been about 2.5 years since I've been doing sourdough, since my sister taught me. And I can tell you now, being on the other side of it, that it's really not that difficult. It's really not that big of a deal, and it does not have to be complicated at all. When I first learned, I was counting all the minutes and the hours, and I even had my timer set. For example, for stretch and fold, I had my timer set for every 30 minutes, and I was making sure that I had those stretch and folds exactly 30 minutes apart, 4 stretch and folds, and I was trying to do everything step by step perfect, and still I noticed that my breads would turn out dense or my starter wouldn't be bubbly, and it was pretty frustrating in the beginning. But eventually I taught myself, you know what? I am making bread from scratch at home for my family. I'm not buying store-bought bread. So if it's dense, it's still homemade bread and we're still gonna eat it. And it's one of those things where when you stop caring too much, it starts to turn out. Suddenly my bread started turning out fluffy and bubbly and just delicious. And so that's one thing that I just want to share with all of you to comfort you. If you're sourdough bread, if you're still just a beginner and it doesn't seem to be turning out, it's still homemade bread and it's still a million times better than store-bought bread. So just keep at it, keep going. The more your hands practice making the sourdough bread, the better it's going to be over time. So just be patient and give yourself grace. Just wanted to share with you something that I learned by accident. It was kind of funny the way that it happened. Last summer, my family and I traveled back to Seattle to visit our family, and we all ended up staying at a beach house. And I decided that I wanted to make some sourdough bread because everyone in my family loves fresh sourdough bread. So I made my dough, and this is still when I was still somewhat new and I was learning a lot about sourdough. I still wasn't too experienced. And at this point, I thought that I still have to do my stretch and fold every 30 minutes. And I was still doing everything exactly by the book. Because we were on vacation and because I was just feeling more relaxed, I made my dough and we all went outside for a bonfire. And I completely forgot about the dough that I left on the counter. So I had just made my dough, mixed it, and I was supposed to do my first stretch and fold in 30 minutes, but I ended up going outside, joining my family for the bonfire, and I never came back to do the stretch and fold. I completely forgot about my dough, and I ended up getting really tired and sleepy from the fire and the smoke in my eyes. So we just all went to bed, and the next morning, my mom is like, "Hey, did you forget about your bread? You didn't do any stretch and folds," and it kind of rose up and went all out over on the counter. And I panicked. I was like, oh, great. This means that I have to throw the dough away. It's going to be useless. But I'm so glad my mom and my sister convinced me to just keep it and do the same process to the dough as I would have if I had done the stretch and folds. So the dough sat there overnight. I didn't do a single stretch and fold. But what I did do in the morning is I took it out, I shaped the dough, and I put it into the refrigerator to cold proof for a couple of hours. Ended up baking it for lunch and it was perfect. It's as if I did every stretch and fold. I saw absolutely no difference. It was light and fluffy. It didn't even turn out dense. It turned out great. So that was a very great learning moment for me. And from then on, I don't always do stretch and folds. A lot of times I actually skip the whole process. So while I was making breakfast this morning, our Costco delivery came, and I'm just sharing with you a few things that I always get from Costco. These are my staples, especially the flour, the maple syrup, the honey. I use all those things in cooking and baking almost on a daily basis. The maple syrup and the honey we absolutely have to have for our coffee and our breakfast, and then onions I always have to have for cooking. The beef is a major one in our diet as well. We love to have the strawberry jam, and cream cheese I use in a lot of cooking and baking also. And then the heavy cream and half, that's for coffee and baking as well. But basically, these are some of my favorite things to have at home that we love to get from Costco. And I'm not associated or affiliated with them in any way at this point, but I just honestly really love these products. And when I have these staples in my home, I can make countless things with them, both cooking and baking. My family loves the combination of sweet and savory, so every time I make sourdough bagels, I will make 1/2 savory and 1/2 sweet. So I will do cream cheese on both sides, and then I'll put an egg on one and strawberry jam on the other. Out of all the jams that my family enjoys, I think strawberry is probably one of our top favorites. Having backyard chickens is a huge blessing because my family does love eggs, and we're so happy to be out of that winter slowdown, and our chickens are laying about a dozen a day again, and that's great for us because we will eat a ton of eggs every day, and especially at breakfast. So I'm really enjoying the abundance of eggs again, and I am making sure to always have eggs every morning for breakfast. Back to the sourdough bread that I made last night. So from 1/2 of the batch, I made the sourdough bagels for breakfast, and the second half I am making a cheddar herb bread, and I'll be using that later for dinner tonight. So I start by chopping up some cheddar cheese. You can use any type of cheese. One of my favorite variations that I've ever made, and my kids and husband also really enjoyed it, I used smoked Gouda cheese. That was an amazing taste. For this bread, I love to use fresh herbs out of my garden instead of the dried herbs that I have in my spice rack. The fresh herbs really give the bread an amazing taste. And a lot of times I'll even chop the herbs and put them inside the bread with the cheese, but my kids don't like too much of a strong herb taste. So today I'm just using it as a garnish on the top, because even just using the herbs on the top of the bread, it still kind of seeps into the bread and gives it more of a gentle flavor. When I make my stuffed breads, it's important for me to add the cheese on each layer as I do each fold in the bread, and this just ensures that there is an even amount of cheese everywhere and it doesn't float just to one side or stay just at the top. This way I make sure that the cheese is kind of all around inside the bread. The bone broth that I prepared last night has been cooking for over 15 hours. I am going to turn it off just a little bit earlier just because I need to get started on dinner. But I'm finally going to share with you what I am preparing from this bone broth. So tonight I am making a chicken, rice, and noodle soup to be served with my cheddar herb bread. In the soup, I'm just adding some sauteed onions and carrots, and then I'm gonna add rice, noodles, and some chicken. So what I do with my bone broth is I remove the whole chicken and the onion, and then I strain the broth through a strainer with a cheesecloth on top of it. That just kind of helps me to contain the mess and also ensure that everything is cleaned out and that I get a clean bone broth. Once my broth is strained and in a pot, I'm adding my sauteed onions and carrots. And while I'll be working on my soup, I'm also going to be setting my bread to bake because it does take a total of 40 minutes. So I'm just going to go ahead and set my bread in the oven, get it baking as I work on my soup so that I can have both things fresh and hot at the same time, ready to be served. So what I like to do with the whole chicken that I used in my bone broth is I like to just pick it apart and shred it and then add it back into the soup, and this just adds a really great texture to the soup, as well as it uses up the meat on the whole chicken, and it adds really nice flavor to the soup as well. So this is one way that I like to use bone broth for my family weekly. I also do like to make bone broth, and my husband and I do enjoy just sipping on it by itself. That's also really good. But I've been trying to implement bone broth more into my family's diet just because of the health benefits. And once I realized how easy it is to make, I do definitely make it a lot more. And I love that it's so quick and easy to throw together, even though, yes, it's a lot of hours, but you really don't have to do anything. The Instapot just does everything for you. It slow cooks it. And I love that it makes such a tasty and nourishing meal for the family. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video and following along as I share my life and recipes and tips with you. And I hope that you found something that encouraged you, inspired you, or motivated you, or just something helpful that you can apply to your homemaking or daily life.